The air in the bridal suite smelled of ozone and white roses. A thunderstorm was brewing over the city, a low, grumbling threat against the floor-to-ceiling windows. But inside, everything was curated perfection. My dress, a column of Italian silk, hung on the gilded door of the armoire like a second skin waiting to be inhabited. My something borrowed was a pair of Art Deco diamond earrings that had belonged to Daniel's grandmother. They felt cool and heavy against my neck, a promise of continuity. My mother Claire was fussing with the stem of a wilting hydrangea in my bouquet, her lips pressed into a thin line of concentration. She has this way of fighting battles for me with her silence. "It's fine, Mom," I said, watching her in the mirror. My makeup was flawless, a natural radiance that cost more than my first car. "The flowers are fine. Everything is fine." She looked up, her eyes soft. "I'm not worried about the flowers, Alara." She didn't need to say more. The specter in the room wasn't the weather. It was the woman in dove-gray silk, holding a champagne flute like a scepter, holding court with my bewildered aunt, Valerie, my stepmother. "Alara, darling," Valerie cooed, gliding over. Her heels made no sound on the plush carpet. "Nervous? Second thoughts are perfectly normal. My mother always said a bride should have one good cry before she walks down the aisle." She patted my arm, her touch like the brush of a cool, dry leaf. "I'm not nervous, Valerie," I said, my voice even. "Daniel is the only sure thing in my life." Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, dear. It's just, well, you hear stories. Men get cold feet. And Daniel, he's such a dynamic man. So many people in his world. It must be hard to keep track." Her gaze flickered to the door, a flicker of something dark and satisfied in her eyes before she glided away. A knot, cold and hard, formed in my stomach. For years her cruelty had been a low-grade hum in the background of my life. The pointed comments about my weight, the jokes about my mother being a has-been artist, the way she'd steer conversations about my father's legacy away from me and toward her daughter, my stepsister, Chloe. My father, Richard, a brilliant but conflict-averse architect, had built a career on creating beautiful structures, but he'd failed to build a single wall to protect me from her. I pushed the feeling down. Not today. She wouldn't win today. The ceremony was a blur of candlelight and earnest vows. When Daniel looked at me, his gray eyes clear and steady, the knot in my stomach dissolved. He was my harbor. My mom, walking me down the aisle, squeezed my arm so hard I knew it would bruise, a beautiful purple testament to her love. My father, standing at the altar beside Daniel, gave me a smile that was warm but slightly apologetic, a look I knew too well. The reception was in full swing at the Ashford, an Art Deco hotel with a ballroom that glittered like the inside of a geode. The band was playing a jazzy cover of a pop song. The champagne was flowing, and for the first time all day, I let myself breathe. I was laughing at something my college roommate was saying when I saw Valerie detach herself from a group of guests and approach the head table. She wasn't walking. She was stalking. "Alara, Daniel," she said, her voice pitched to carry over the music. It had an oily, solicitous quality that immediately put me on edge. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but something has come to my attention. Something I think Daniel's family, and yours, Alara, have a right to know." The music seemed to falter, or maybe the band just sensed the shift in the air. Conversations around us died down. She reached into her pristine silver clutch and produced a thick, textured envelope. From it, she slid a series of photographs, holding them up like a prosecutor presenting evidence. The first was of Daniel, his arm around a stunning woman with dark, curly hair. They were outside a restaurant, laughing. The second was a close-up, their heads tilted together, intimate. The third was them kissing on the cheek. They were high quality, professionally taken, the work of a private investigator, A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I felt my mother's hand clamp onto my wrist from behind my chair. My father stood up, his face pale. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," Valerie said, turning to me, her face a mask of theatrical pity. "I hired someone. I was worried. I saw him with her last month, and I couldn't stay silent. A wife should know." She looked at the crowd, the picture of the concerned, protective stepmother, his little family friend. It was a masterpiece of public destruction. The word mistress hung in the air, unspoken, but deafening. I stared at the photos, my brain struggling to process the image. The woman was beautiful, achingly familiar in a way I couldn't place. But it wasn't the infidelity that struck me. It was the look on Daniel's face. It wasn't lust or passion. It was pure, unadulterated joy. The kind of joy he usually reserved for me. A sliver of ice pierced my heart. The silence was a physical weight. I could feel the eyes of 200 people boring into me, waiting for my collapse. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. This was her win. The ultimate public humiliation she'd been engineering for years. But then Daniel moved. He didn't flinch, didn't pale. He simply stood up, his movements calm and deliberate. He took the photograph from Valerie's hand, his expression not of a guilty man, but of someone looking at a cherished artifact. He turned to me, his eyes holding mine, and the ice in my heart began to thaw. "Alara," he said, his voice steady and warm. "This is my sister." The word hung in the air, a direct contradiction to the image. Valerie's theatrical pity froze on her face. "Your what?" "My sister," Daniel repeated louder this time. He turned to the crowd, a sad smile on his lips. "Her name is Lena, my older sister." He looked back at the photo, his thumb gently tracing the woman's face. "She's been living in Barcelona for the last 6 years. She's a freelance photographer, and she's been traveling. We're incredibly close." He looked up at Valerie, his gray eyes now hard as flint. "She flew in yesterday. I asked her to stay away from the hotel until today because I wanted to surprise Alara. She's supposed to be here for the toast." He let the words sink in. The crowd's whisper shifted from scandalized to a low, excited hum. Valerie's face cycled through a slideshow of emotions, confusion, disbelief, and a dawning, sickening horror. My father stepped forward, his eyes wide. "You have a sister? Why didn't you?" "We've never—" Daniel's gaze shifted to him, then to Valerie, and finally landed on Chloe, who was standing frozen by the bar, her face a sickly shade of white. "We're a private family," he said, his voice cold. "And Lena's existence isn't something we've ever hidden, it's just not something we've had cause to bring up. Until now." He turned back to Valerie. "So, Valerie, since you were so concerned with, what did you call it? Family friends? Perhaps you'd like to explain to my wife, to my new family, and to everyone here, why you've been having me followed. And more importantly, why you felt the need to try and destroy my wedding day with a lie." The ballroom was utterly silent. The trap she had so carefully built had just snapped shut around her own ankles. Valerie's mouth opened and closed. For the first time in the 15 years I'd known her, she was utterly speechless. The color had drained from her face, leaving her foundation looking like a mask. I made a mistake," she stammered, looking around wildly for an exit, for a sympathetic face. There were none. I saw them together. They looked so... I was just trying to protect Alara. It was an error in judgment. "An error?" My mother's voice cut through the room like a blade. It was quiet, but it carried. "You hired a private investigator to follow my daughter's fiancé. That's not an error, Valerie. That's a targeted attack." My father stepped forward, his face a thundercloud of confusion and dawning anger. "Val, what is this? What were you thinking?" He looked from his wife to the photographs in Daniel's hand, his whole world view tilting on its axis. This was the moment. This was where I saw my entire life with him flash before my eyes. All the times he'd missed a recital because Valerie had scheduled a dinner. All the holidays where Chloe's gifts were piled high while mine were an afterthought. I saw him weighing 15 years of marriage to this viper against a lifetime of fatherhood he'd half-assed. I braced myself for his apologetic shrug, his attempt to smooth things over. But then a sound cut through the tension. A sob. But it wasn't from Valerie. It was Chloe. She was clutching the back of a chair, her knuckles white. Her mascara was running in dark tracks down her cheeks. "Stop it!" she whispered, then louder, a raw, desperate cry. "Just stop it!" All eyes turned to her. She looked at me, and the look wasn't of a stepsister caught in an embarrassing moment. It was pure, unadulterated hatred, laced with something else, a desperate, gut-wrenching envy. "It wasn't her idea," Chloe said, pointing a shaking finger at her mother. "It was mine." Valerie whirled around. "Chloe, be quiet!" "No!" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking. "Look at you. You're pathetic. You failed." She turned her venomous gaze on me. "You think you're so perfect. You got the guy. You got the perfect dress, the perfect life, the perfect family. You always get everything." The room was in an uproar now. People were on their phones, their mouths agape. A waiter dropped a tray of champagne flutes, the shattering glass a perfect punctuation mark to the implosion. "I saw him first," Chloe spat, the words tumbling out in a flood. "At that charity gala a year ago, I pointed him out to Mom. I told her he was exactly the kind of man I should marry." "And then you?" She jabbed a finger at me. "You show up with him 2 months later. You stole him." Daniel stared at her, utterly bewildered. "I met Alara at a bookshop. I've never even spoken to you." "It doesn't matter," Chloe wailed. "You were supposed to be mine. Mom was supposed to fix it. She always fixes it." She looked at her mother, her face a mask of pathetic betrayal. "You said you'd handle it. You said you'd find a way to make him see she was wrong for him. This was your big plan?" The truth was out. It wasn't just Valerie's vendetta against me. It was her daughter's entitled, delusional obsession with a man she'd never even met. Valerie hadn't just been trying to hurt me. She'd been trying to steal my life for her own daughter. My father didn't move for a long time. He just stared at his wife and stepdaughter, the two people he shared a home with, as if he were seeing them for the first time. And maybe he was. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't the placating, diplomatic tone he used at work or the distant, gentle one he used with me. It was low, gravelly, and sounded like it was being dragged over broken glass. "You," he said, pointing at Valerie, his finger trembling slightly. "You tried to ruin my daughter's wedding because your daughter has a crush on her husband?" He took a step closer to her. "You have spent 15 years chipping away at my little girl. 15 years. And I let you." The last words were choked, full of a self-loathing so profound it was painful to hear. He turned to me, his eyes wet. "Alara, I am so sorry. I am so deeply, unforgivably sorry." He looked back at Valerie, and the weakness I'd always associated with him was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "This is over. Not tomorrow, not next week. Right now. This marriage is over. I want you and your daughter out of my house by the time I get back tonight." Valerie's composure finally shattered. "Richard, you're being dramatic. It was a misunderstanding. Chloe is distraught. We can talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," he said, his voice firm. "You declared war on my child on her wedding day. You lost. Go home and pack." Security had materialized, summoned by the hotel manager. They stood by, waiting. Valerie, with one last venomous glare at me, grabbed Chloe's arm and dragged her towards the exit, her daughter's sobs echoing off the Art Deco walls. The moment the doors swung shut behind them, a wave of sound hit me. It wasn't just chatter, it was a roar. People were laughing, talking, gesturing wildly. My college roommate was fanning herself with her napkin. My mother was in my father's arms, a sight I hadn't seen in 15 years. And then a new figure emerged from the crowd. A woman with a cascade of dark, curly hair and Daniel's gray eyes. Lena. She walked straight up to me and wrapped me in a hug that smelled of sandalwood. "I am so sorry my debut caused such a scene," she whispered in my ear, her accent a soft mix of American and Spanish. But also, that was the most spectacular thing I've ever seen. Daniel pulled us both into a hug, and I started to laugh. It was a hysterical, shaky, beautiful laugh that came from somewhere deep in my soul. The fear, the shock, the ice, it all melted away, replaced by a giddy, triumphant joy. The band, seizing the moment, struck up a lively swing number. My father, wiping his eyes, offered his hand to my mother. "Claire," he said, his voice rough, "may I have this dance, for old time's sake?" My mom looked at me, and I nodded, smiling. She took his hand. It was the first step in a long, uncertain road, but it was a step. Daniel, Lena, and I stood in the middle of the beautiful, glorious chaos. My dress was still perfect, my earrings still cool against my neck. But now, the promise they held wasn't just of a future with Daniel. It was of a future where the poison had been lanced. A future where the architects of my own unhappiness had been exposed by the very blueprint of their own malice. Valerie had wanted to make this day about her. In the end, she did. She became the unforgettable, spectacular villain in the best story our family would ever tell. The day the stepmother tried to burn down my wedding and ended up setting her own world on fire instead. It was, without a doubt, the highlight of the day.